Recording in progress.
Okay, I need to do this again. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, online and here at the Art Workers Guild. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Christmas event and to our speaker, Dr. Tony Lidington, who is a scholar and a practitioner, one of those very rare people in the academic world. Dr. Lidington's speciality is popular culture and entertainments. He'll be speaking to us about the Pierrot tradition and indeed will be performing some things from that Pierrot tradition for us here tonight. So thank you very, very much.
Great. So here we are again. You can never trust technology, can you? It's already gone off. Hello to everyone at home. Hope you can see me. Can you all hear me is the first thing to check. Good, it is a join-in show after all. I'm glad that you can hear me on account of the fact I've been performing for the last 40 years at Seasides and in the streets. So I'm used to having to raise my voice. But if you can't hear me for any reason at the back, or I guess at home, then feel free to heckle. So I'm going to talk to you today about Seaside concert parties and Pierrot troupes. Oh, you're telling me to move across. Is that a bit better? Yeah. There we are, I've got the thumbs up. There we are, you can see me at home now. Hello. I'm going to talk to you about Seaside Pierrot troupes and concert parties and the evolution of Seaside entertainment. And I'm going to come out because I first started getting interested in Seaside when I was an undergraduate at University in Prom. And then I had a book. I was doing a module on popular entertainment forms. And they told me to read all sorts of things. I didn't read anything they told me to, but I read this book, a book called Promenades and Pierrots by Bill Purtley. Know Bill Purtley? Yeah, people. That's the book that I read, and it told me about Pierrot troupes. We'll pass that around. And I couldn't find much information about Pierrot troupes apart from what was in there. But that's largely a kind of anecdotal, with like kind of nice pictures and a little bit of stuff about the history of it. And I got to know Bill Purtley just before he died. He lived quite close to me, and I went to see him and talk about his life as a Pierrot. When he told me he hadn't ever been, it's just that his publisher had stuck him in a costume. He had been with the folder rolls, which was the evolution one. That's another story we might get to a little bit later. Now, the other thing that I found, I'll show the people at home these as well, were in various different sort of jumble sales in those days. They were called. Don't have jumble sales now, you have boot sales. I found lots of these. These are postcards. They're 120 years old. And I started collecting them, putting them on my wall. Some of my early ones, you can still see it, got drawing bin pots. I have them in my bed in Regency Square in Brighton. These are spares. I've now got 12,000. The largest collection in the world. But at that time, I just collected them because I was fascinated. I kept finding more and more. You don't look at them, pass them around, I put those messages on the back, all of these postcards. First brought out around the time that, of course, postcards were first being used in this country, where you could put a divided message on the back with the address and a picture on the front. And this was being done at the very first years of the 20th century, and the Pierrots took advantage of that as one of the ways of making money, as we might get to in a minute. Now, I couldn't find any more about it, and I'm a practical sort of chap, and because I couldn't read about it, I thought, well, and the best way to do it is to do it. The best way to learn it is to do it, to embody it. So I went to the local fabric shop, Fabric Fair, and I bought 30 yards of bridal satin. I taught myself how to use my mother's sewing machine. And I bought myself, with my 21st birthday money, a banjo. Not this one, actually, but a banjo not dissimilar to it. I bought myself a banjo in my birthday. I taught myself 8 chords. And I persuaded 4 of my mates to come with me and perform on Brighton Beach. I wanted to make some money because I was signing on. I was living in a squat at the time. And I wanted to meet girls. Both of these tasks were successful. and I managed to avoid the DHSS. And ever after, from that date in 1983, I became known as Uncle Tacko. And as Uncle Tacko, I have performed on and off, on and off, at the Seaside throughout Britain. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is a joining show, and all Seaside shows have joining chorus. This is one you'll know. Everybody knows this song. It's the best definition of a folk tune that I can possibly know, the one that everyone automatically knows. You will automatically know it, and I'd like you to join in. Oh, I. I'm not sure what Mark Sheridan would have made of that particular rendition. So, where had it all started? Why had it all started? Who started it? And why was this history so obscure? And I've spent the last 40 years researching the form and the history in both practice and theory, and I was keen to find out about the evolution of this neglected mass medium, or as the academics call it, intangible cultural heritage. Do you know the term? Intangible cultural heritage is that stuff which we already know, which is part of our culture, but nobody gives it any value. Yeah. So if I said to you, there's a small booth on a beach, it's got red and white stripes, and it's half a mile in the distance, what would you all say it was? Yeah. And if I was on stage in a pantomime and the baddie comes up behind me and there's creepy music, what would you shout? Correct. And the colours or the smells of a fairground or the sawdust ring of a circus, these are all part of our intangible cultural heritage. The things that have no cultural value, but are important and integral to our identity, I would say, as British people, a British cultural heritage, which we simply don't value. And that's where most popular entertainment forms lie. And that's what I spend my time researching, finding out about, and then applying to contemporary contexts to find out how and why they work now. So we need to go back into the history. And oh, I see. Hello at home. I'll have to just be a bit shorter. I'll wind myself down. It's an old Punch and Judy gag, that. So we're going to go through some of the history. Let's see if the technology works. No. Try again. No. Brilliant. Let me try this one. No. We might need to call for Alice at this point. Alice is the technician who's out there to make this particular item work. For some reason, it's not functioning. Well, no, it's not working on here either.
Oh, okay, it may be.
Thank you. Whatever that means, I agree.
It may be that you need to get rid of this first. All right, and then you go down here. You press the arrow.
Lovely.
And
That's all right. It will come back in a moment. Normally, yes. Yeah. I love it. Okay, so the character of Pierrot originates as Pedrolino from the Commedia dell'arte of the 16th and 17th centuries. And these peripatetic troupes performed all across Europe. That's Pedrolino over there. Can you see him? Okay. This won't go wrong or go boing at any point. So here we have. It's like the showman we've had at the fairground. There we are. Pedrolino here from the Morris Sandbook, which I'm sure you already know. Now, when the character comes to Paris in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century, the name and the character evolves into that of Pierrot. Do you know what the word Pierrot means? No, little Peter. That's what it means, little Peter. And he evolves from his commedia roots into a whimsical and silent mime. Pedrolino wasn't necessarily silent. And this character, Pierrot, expresses through action and music the emotions and psychological complexity demanded by the prevailing avant-garde form of romanticism. Now, Jean-Gaspard Deburau, who you can see here, was acknowledged as the founder of this new style of mimed Pierrot, and many productions were created featuring one or more Pierrot characters dressed in a familiar baggy white clothes, usually black pom-poms, with pale face paint and a black skull cap. There we are. We've got some latecomers in the corner. You haven't missed too much other than the technology going wrong and the chance to join in a song. But I'll let you join in on it a bit later. So we're just talking about Pierrot. Now, I just want to tell you a story about Pierrot. They say it's an apocryphal tale. It's about how Pierrot gets his costume and his look. So the story is that when an orphan boy he comes up to and he goes ahead and he meets St. Peter at the pearly gates. And he welcomes him, said he can come inside and wear this suit of white clothes. He calls him little Peter at that point, brings him inside the gate, and says, but there's one rule when you're here, which is you mustn't go outside the gates of heaven and play with the other children. But like all boys, little Peter surveys. He goes outside the gates and he plays tag with all the other little kids. And wherever they touch him, each spot, black splotch. That's the origin. Not hot. But I think it's not hot. Oh! It's a sweet. So, in April 1891, there was a touring Parisian production called L'Enfant Prodigue. And it opened at the West End's Prince of Wales Theatre and featured a family of silent Pierrots who didn't have telephones in an adapted storyline of the Bible's The Prodigal Son. So here you can see Jane May. And Jane May was a very famous mime of the time. And interestingly, look, she's actually cross-dressed, boy. She's in a breeches role. She's got an all-white costume on this occasion, but she was part of a whole family of Pierrots that was in this particular production. And it was a sensation that year. That year of 1891, it was an absolute sensation in London. And it was seen by a banjo manufacturer and practitioner who was called Clifford Essex. And he was so inspired that he decided to create the first musical troupe of al fresco, that means outdoor, Pierrots. Now, hold that thought, because we're going to come back to that moment in a little while. Up until that season, the predominant outdoor entertainment at British Seaside and other holiday locations, such as race meetings and fairs, were what were known in those days as nigger minstrels. Now, that's an offensive term, which I won't use at any other point today, because obviously it causes great offense to large members of our community, but it's important that people know the terminology, because if you're going to research it, those are the terms that you will have to look at, along with others that are difficult to deal with today. When I teach with my students now, that I have to teach them about the terminology, even though we don't then subsequently choose to use it. The tradition of minstrelsy in Britain dates back well before blackface Pierrot troupes or blackface performance troupes. And for centuries, traveling minstrels had existed. And from the 18th century, Central European minstrel singers toured Europe and America. Now, I'd like to have a look at some of these, quite fun. You're able to see here the Pandean minstrels. So this is a late 18th, early 19th century troupe performing at the Vauxhall Gardens. Now, look at their fancy hats. Those hats could be seen from quite a distance away, couldn't they? A comical hat. You see the instruments that they're playing. So you've got some tambourine, a triangle, you've got a jiggly candy. You've got a tambourine on this side, a big drum. And of course, they're all playing panpipes. Most of them will be familiar from Punch and Judy in the 19th. But there they are, sitting in a semicircle, in an informal relationship to one another, so that they can see and interact. There isn't one conduct. It's not part of a concert, not part of a symphony. It's part of live al fresco entertainment with outdoor instruments. And on this side, it became particularly popular in the 19th century, the early decades of the early 19th century, to have minstrels who would dress in the vernacular folk dress of their location. So here's an example of the Rayner family. Look at those fancy hats. You could see them from a long distance away, just like the conical hat of Pierrot. Look how they're all wearing vaguely matching outfits, standing rather jauntily, hand on hip, but in an informal with one another, standing in a semicircle, usually singing in harmony. In fact, one of their particular was everyone went to see yodel. Yodel, again, another folk form of singing, but yodel was also thought to be a little bit like some of the forms of opera singing. So what you get is a blur between the folk art and the informal way of dressing with this spectacular style of uniformity, all creating outdoor entertainment. All of these are aspects of minstrelsy. Minstrelsy that predates the blackface form. So this, as the 19th century progressed, blackface minstrelsy became an increasingly common means of busking a living, with the minimum of musical or dance skills. Oh, yes. Let me jump to one. Yeah. And it was these minstrel troupes who popularized the use of the banjo for musical accompaniment. So you can see here, these are the minstrel troupes. So T.D. Rice, who was an individual musical star, before it's a white guy, black guy. We know the term, his dance Jim Crow, we know it now from the Jim Crow laws of segregation. But he was a big sensation in the 1830s, both in America and in Britain, performing the Jim Crow dance, a parody of black performance forms, both in terms of its music, its lyricism, and dance. On this side, when it comes back, you'll be able to see the Virginia minstrels. And the Virginia minstrels, can you see, look, they're in semicircle. Can you see, look, that they're in matching costumes? Can you see that there they are playing loud instruments outdoors as well as indoors? And you can see from the way that they're performed, the interaction, the excitement, and the energy there was in the Virginia minstrels performance. But they too were white guys, black guys. That's what they are. And they came over to Britain in the 1840s, and again were a huge sensation over here. Excuse me. These minstrel troupes popularized the use of the banjo for musical accompaniment. And Clifford Essex took what was generally regarded as a novelty ethnic instrument, pretty much exclusively associated with African, American, and Caribbean cultures, and he devised technical adaptations to its manufacture alongside innovative new playing techniques. And the banjo, just like the electric guitar 40 years afterwards, was an exotic new instrument that proponents such as Essex wished to see adapted as more than just an exotic novelty. And that banjo that I was playing earlier, that one is a Clifford Essex banjo. As the 19th century progressed, black-faced minstrelsy became an increasingly common means of busking a living, with the minimum of musical or dance skills, as you could tell by my efforts earlier, so that compared with the high-profile, highly professional troupes like Christian Moore's minstrels and Burgess minstrels, which you'll probably know, Many of those eking a living at the seasides were regarded as somewhat tawdry outfits. So it was at the seaside and other holiday locations such as fairgrounds and race meetings that the blackface minstrelsy form proliferated. Now, the one on the side, the far side over there in Brighton, that's actually some Afro-British performers, possibly Afro-American performers performing on the streets as well, which was also something that took place at this time, but relatively rarely. Here is a much more, nearer to me, is a much more common image of a white performer performing at the seaside, and you can see there with the sea behind him and the crowd in front. So this was the context, let's hope that that brings it on. This was the context in which Clifford Essex created the first British Pierrot troupe just a few weeks after watching L'Enfant Prodigue. That was Clifford Essex introducing himself, playing a Clifford Essex banjo, which is what you can hear now, which is a 1903 cylinder recording of Clifford Essex performing. Clifford Essex's Pierrots, known as the Pierrot Banjo Team originally, gave their first performances at the prestigious society event of Henley Regatta in July 1891. This is actually a picture that you can see here of them in about 1894. And as they carry on playing, I'll point out some things you might like to see. You can see they're playing banjos here on. They're actually playing the black painted hut at the Henley Regatta. Here they are, advertising themselves. This is Kate Sampley, for his first Pierrot, even at this time, performing there, most of his name is Spring, which is the first of the song movement. They have metal reeds, they don't go out of tune, out of words. So like the banjo, it makes a good sound like this. There they are, don't they look beautiful? In my book, which I've written this whole section there about how sound carries well from a banjo over words. So the way they look, the way they sound, makes them much more popular than the guys back. See? In a moment, there, you can see a black face to on a heart. No one wants to listen now, because this is the hit of the band. That's what people were watching, even in 1894, 3 years after the very first season that they had done. After they performed at the Henley Regatta, they performed in August at the Cowes Regatta on the Isle of Wight for the Prince of Wales. They were invited onto his royal yacht, and as a result, they were ever after known as Clifford Essex's Royal Pierrots, the first Pierrot troupe to adopt the title. The Pierrots inverted the black face look of the minstrels and presented a more refined, smart look with virtuoso skills on their instruments like the banjo and strill. Their shows met with such success that in the decade following the foundation of Essex's troupe, this performance model of a group of Pierrots clad uniformly in floppy white costumes, black pom-poms, conical hats, presenting a variety-based show format al fresco, using music, comedy, and dance, became so widespread that almost every resort in Britain could boast of one or more troupes. The Pierrots appealed to the mass market of holidaymakers, and the Pierrot costume and makeup provided an alternative, exotic presence that chimed with the romance and excitement of seaside holidaymaking. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, pantomime, music hall, traveling fairs, circuses, and Pierrot troupes provided a vast amount of employment for performance artists, and between them, they provided the primary cultural experiences for the majority of the working class audiences of Britain. The location for the Pierrot performances of the late 19th century were often little more than boards or trestle stages on the sands. There. Now, as you can see, this is Tom Carrick, who's in Scarborough, who was one of the early troops. And there they are, just a simple trestle stage, with just some boards above. Not a million miles away from some of those early commedia troops would have performed. Here they are in the open skies, with the audience standing around. There you can see a banjo leaning up at the side, and behind here, where their sign is on, that's got the stool on it as well. Above them, they've got an umbrella. I don't suppose it would have provided much shelter for the audience today, but it would have provided enough cover perhaps for their instruments, but perhaps more importantly, from 50 or 100 or 200 yards away, you go, oh, there's something going on, I wonder what it is. It's just a form of advertising. It's sticking a flag up saying, we're here, the show is on. But here it is. They're dressed uniformly with those fancy hats, playing music, singing songs, and having an interaction, just like the minstrel troops had before, but they had been dressed in black. In most of the early Pierrot lineups, the strill and the banjo were very common because, as I've said, they were good for outdoor performance. They remained in tune, and these instruments also allowed the performer to sing at the same time as dancing. If you play a trumpet, you can't. Play a flute, you can't. You play a clarinet, you can't. But you can if you've got a banjo or a strill, or maybe a fiddle even. They had to compete against the sound of the waves, the wind, the salesmen barking their wares, and the general hurly-burly of seaside life, as I have found out to my cost over the years. They have to hold the attention of a passing audience. Some troupes, such as the Waterloo Pierrots in Bridlington, or Gilbert Rogers' minstrel troupe in Aberystwyth. Let's see if is it going to do that again? There we are. They even managed to cart a full-sized harp across the sands. Can you see it there? But once again, you can see that there they are on a trestle stage, in an informal relationship with the audience, sitting in a semicircle with a strill, a harp, yes, I think he's got a fiddle, performing songs, sketches, routines in an informal relationship with the audience. The time they're sat around, but also, as I know from having performed on countless features, lots of people not remotely interested, looking the other way. A full-sized harp doesn't go out of tune either, it should be noticed. If it were a popular troupe, then there might be a roped-off area near the stage, possibly with deck chairs or bentwood seating, as you can see here, and those would be available for a small charge. But the majority of the Pierrot's income in the early years was purely from what was known as bottling. Now, do you know the term bottling? No? Yes, some do. The story is this. I used to be a bottler. In the early days, or when people were busking, you would take a bottle, a glass bottle with a slot. You take it out and you collect a penny, £5. And they would go through the slot in the top, and then the bottler would go back to the stage, smash the bottle on the stage, and they would share the proceeds as a profit share. Hence the term bottling, which we still use when we busk. There is another story, which is that when they were going around with the bottling, sometimes people still thought they had it. They would insist that the Pierrot would have a fly in their other hand so that they could collect. And when they got back, they would have to show the other Pierrots the fly. And they would watch it fly off, because if he didn't, he could have had his hand open and he could get it. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that concert party is a term which had been in use since the 1880s to describe a small group of musical performers who generally performed at small recitals in a genteel, refined manner, usually indoors, actually, in the early years. And their material would include songs, sketches, and monologues, just like the Pierrots and minstrels had done. However, they didn't sport the stylized costume or makeup that the Pierrots had, and instead relied on usually more formal evening wear or smart leisure wear, such as boaters and blazers. Now, we're going to come back to that as well in a little while, but I just want you to hold that thought that at the same time there were Pierrot troupes, there were also concert parties going around. These things do fuse in a little while. Now, the Pierrot costume, and actually those of the concert party, is relatively easy to replicate. They require a simple uniform costume with the minimal of props and staging. All the material was family orientated, variety fare with songs, dances, skits, or in the Pierrot world, we would call them showmans. So it was a relatively simple task to get a troupe together. And as a result, hundreds of professional, amateur, and semi-professional troupes were formed. And it's this blur of amateurism and professionalism that is actually a feature of the whole Seaside phenomenon. And in just 2 decades, Pierrot troupes proliferated at seaside resorts all across the coasts of the United Kingdom, from Aberdeen in Scotland to Bournemouth in Dorset, from Margate in Kent to Buxton on the Isle of Man. And as the 20th century turned, the Pierrots had almost entirely usurped the black-faced minstrels who had dominated the open-air entertainment scene for half a century. So we're going to have some images now. I tried to pick some places. When I give talks about Pierrot troupes, I try and relate them as closely as I can to the coastal resorts that might be around. Now, London, not so easy. It's just about everywhere. And quite often people have had their holidays elsewhere in more recent years. But I put a few together to show you today, see what you would think. So let's see what we have. Oh, there's the bottlers. Got that one. There's the bottling. You see a chap collecting. So you can see Will Catlin's in the circular thing at the top. Is he up in Weymouth there? A typical troupe, Will Catlin, one of the best known of the Pierrot impresarios. He had a large number of troupes and ran troupes for 40 years. I got to know his daughter actually recently, just before she died up in Llandudno, although I have discovered that he had a second bigamous marriage that nobody knows about, but that's for another book that perhaps I shall write one day. And then here we have them at Bournemouth. So you can see it will have been a different troupe. It wouldn't necessarily have been a touring troupe. And here we in the corner, which you can't see quite because of the indent with me. There's a ventriloquist who's got a little vent doll who's dressed exactly identical to him. When I was a Pierrot, I used to have one as well. Ballard Brown's Entertainers, there you see a concert party. Still in the outdoors on a simple alfresco stage, a trestle stage. And there they are with a couple of Pierrots actually, or female performers, but in that slight lounge wear, but still uniform and informal. And here we've got Birchmore and Lindens in Bournemouth, another typical troupe, this time using a piano, all sat on a piano. We've got a couple more. The Isle of Wight, Sandown's quite interesting. I wanted to show you one as in one side as a kind of more formal pose, but I really enjoy this one here, which is on the street. I think it's Ventnor. When they're actually on the street, the Pierrots were able to busk anywhere. They were flexible. So they didn't, if you've got a trestle stage, you can still do your routine somewhere else, either collect a crowd or advertise for the show that's going on a little bit later on. But I really enjoy that picture because it's not dissimilar, if you remember, from the one in Brighton where we had the black performers performing outside there. So it's very similar, just on the street. And finally, Pellicier's Follies. There's a book actually just come out, you probably know it, Anthony Binns, the first book that's been written about a Pierrot troupe for a very long time. A really interesting book that I'm just making my way through at the moment. But he was he was a West End Pierrot troupe. So this is pre-First World War. It had become so popular that he went from the Sands and ended up performing in the West End, and a highly successful character until his untimely death at a young age in 1913. The familiar accessible locations, the style of delivery and decorous material, together with the Edwardian associations of the seaside holiday with a sense of place, home, and stability, meant that by the outbreak of the First World War, Pierrot troupes and concert parties had become a popular entertainment form whose songs, routines, and image evoked a nostalgic glimpse of normality and a sense of patriotic pride, which was a tremendous boost to servicemen's morale and a temporary escape from the privations and horrors of war. At home, right from the outset of war, philanthropic individuals, such as the well-known actress Lena Ashwell, had organised civilian Pierrot troupes and concert parties in order to raise money for the armed forces fighting overseas and recruit support for the war effort. Companies were sent out to tour the war zones and perform behind the lines in training camps, rest camps, distribution centres, and field hospitals on both the Western and Eastern fronts. Some troupes were known as permanent companies and were located in one location for up to 3 months at a time. However, since conflict areas were too dangerous for civilians, most regiments, including those from Canada and Australia, offered divisional concert troupes and battalion canteen shows. Pierrot troupes and concert parties comprised of servicemen were also established on many naval vessels and even the air and ballooning corps. So here you can see a troupe, which is in Salonika. And you can see the guys, there they are, performing on a trestle stage in the open air. You can see behind them, there's a semicircle of plinths on which they would sit, stand, or lounge. They're dressed in a typical costume. It's not white, I agree, but maybe all they could find was khaki, who knows? And in front, you can see the soldiers, Scottish battalion, who are watching them. It's a simple staging, the same techniques, the same songs. Not sure what that is. Let's try that. Here's another one. You can see proudly sat with them is their officer, but there they are, sitting in the familiar ruffs, costumes, pom-poms. They're not quite sitting in a semicircle, but I suspect those stools would have been distributed like that on stage. Now, since female artists weren't allowed to perform anywhere near the front, it was common for men in the all-male troupes to cross-dress in order to fulfill feminine roles. And as a result, good female impersonators were highly prized, and drag acts became a popular feature of almost every show. At a time when effeminacy was regarded as a weakness and homosexuality was still illegal, it's a curiously liberal outcome of the all-male trench warfare of the First World War that it should provide a safe environment for the embodiment and exploration of same-sex relationships. Men dressing as women became a stock part of most Pierrot entertainments from that point onwards, even when more women became members of the troupes after the war had ended. This is one of my favorite pictures, which is one that's in the Imperial War Museum, the original. And you can see here, we have a pretty Pierrot, a Canadian one, of course, from the Maple Leaves, sat there in his Pierrot costume, applying his lipstick and makeup, being watched over by his adoring Pierrot in his little kit. And in front of him is his office, tenderly kneeling before him and offering him his wreath. These are the little plinths that you can see in other photographs are set in a semicircle, in an informal relationship to one another, in the open air, performing from a trestle stage for an audience this scale. The First World War. During the Great War, tens of thousands of performances were given by many hundreds of artistes and servicemen throughout the global theatre of war, and it provided a vital service for the forces and for the nation. It also consolidated the Pierrot form as a central aspect of British popular entertainment, which once the war ended became the archetypal seaside holiday entertainment throughout Britain, alongside Punch and Judy and brass bands. Now, the interwar years were the heyday of the Pierrot troupes, although through the 20s, the Pierrot image became increasingly blurred with that of the concert party, which I discussed earlier. The influence of the jazz age and flappers brought an air of informality and modernity to Britain that holidaymakers embraced wholeheartedly. So perhaps it's not so surprising that after the war, it became increasingly common for the seaside entertainers to relinquish that stylized commedia-based Pierrot costume of ruff, baggy tunic, pom-poms, conical hat, to be replaced with a more modern and accessible look. Often, these were the same troupes as had performed in the Pierrot outfit some years earlier, but had now simply decided to move with the time. So here you can see Gold's troupe in Margate, over here. They've got Pierrots, you can see there in a Pierrot costume. The rest of the boys are in concert party outfits. Massive, nautical, very witty. Here, excuse me, Jack Shepherd's a very long-lasting, well-known troupe of Brighton. Came out of the highwayman if you're interested in Brighton's history. Does anyone recognise this chap? That's what it's called. Hold on. That's a young Max Miller. He started there. And as another little anecdote about Max Miller, excuse me, in the following season in 1920-21, he went up to Bradford and he rehearsed with a chap with Ernest Biggs, who had trouped both in Bradford and across the Bradford by the sea, and Morecambe, and I used to live here. And then in Bradford, I used to be on the board of the theatre, a company that used to work with people with learning. And it was there where that theatre company was. It was the same place that Max Miller had rehearsed with Ernest Biggs. And it was there. I know my mind. Such coincidences. Have we got another one there? Yes, I think we've got another one. What else we got? Oh yeah, so we've got some more. Willie Cave's Bournemouth Pierrot Players, 1935. No real sign of the Pierrot costume, but happy to embrace the term Pierrot Players. Like some of the Pierrots have been happy to embrace the term minstrel and other unfortunate names associated with black belts. Here, the Pierrot Players of 1928 in Bournemouth. Not a sign of a Pierrot, but they're still in an informal relationship. They're still standing in a circle. Maybe not necessarily in the alfresco in that situation. It's hard to tell by the lighting. And here, one last one. I think that's another Willie Cave. No, it's the Sands, that one up there. And they're half in Pierrot costume and half not. Got another one? Oh yes, I wanted to put this one in for you because it's a London troupe. In the interwar years, the Co-Optimists. Do you know some of the members of the Co-Optimists? Stanley Holloway's the famous one. He started with a troupe actually over in Clacton. Laddie Cliff was another, Dave Burnaby. So some very famous names associated with the Co-Optimists, and follow on quite clearly from the Follies in that West End tradition. This was a superstar troupe. This was a kind of a super concert party, if you like, built of people who already had made their names. Every resort sported at least one and sometimes as many 4 or 5 different concert parties. The content of their shows remained family friendly and accessible, which even in a more permissive age still suggested a decorous, refined style of entertainment. The 20s and 30s witnessed Pierrot troupes becoming an integral feature of the archetypal British seaside holiday. But world events once again shattered the world of concert parties, with the direct declaration of war by Neville Chamberlain on September the 3rd, 1939. And this signaled the end of an era and a break with the Edwardian past. The seasonal summer work of the seaside Pierrot troupes and concert parties ceased entirely for the duration of the war. Every possible coastal defense was undertaken to confound any imminent Nazi invasion. Seafront shops, kiosks, and cafes were closed down, whilst the beaches were filled with lines of barbed wire and anti-tank and anti-personnel minefields. High scaffolding fences were positioned in low water, together with reinforced concrete anti-tank traps. Although in Bournemouth, as you can see, some people still manage to sunbathe in between the barbed wire. There's another one to show you there in just a moment. When it comes back on, there we are. Oh no. Many seaside piers were requisitioned by the Navy. Some had holes blown in them or even destroyed to prevent them from being used as landing stages. by an invading Axis force, although I can't see how a Panzer tank would have got up the Palace Pier without falling through it. The beach was no longer a leisure attraction, but a battleground, so that for the first time, the British seaside was a frontier of fear, danger, and threat, rather than a romantic, escapist idyll. However, as you can see, just as in the First World War, entertainment was needed for morale, both at home and in the military, most performers who were fit and able were enlisted into the forces. But prior to the declaration of war, a theatrical impresario called Basil Dean had been lobbying the War Office for a funded unit of civilians to provide entertainment for the troops in the event of armed conflict. And it was Dean's idea to connect ENSA. You all know what ENSA stands for?
Every night.
Yeah, that's what Tommy Trinder said. Well done. The Entertainment National Services Association. I don't think every night something awful. I'm sure out of it all, there must have been some good ones. But he combined ENSA with the organization that ran all the military canteens, catering and clubs, which were the obvious military performance venues. And this organization was known as the NAFI, the Navy, Army and Air Forces Institute. And he set up ENSA HQ at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. And from there, the voluntary mobilization of the entertainment profession was organized, but using key personnel who were drafted in from the pre-war Pierrot and concert party industry, because they knew how to do flexible entertainment troupes that could fly in and out of different situations. ENSA performers were civilian amateurs who were unable to serve in the forces due to health or age. They were all auditioned and then placed into local divisional concert parties before being sent out to tour. But it wasn't until October 1940 that the first ENSA concert parties were actually sent out to France. Performances took place on board ships, in the desert, in hospitals, distribution centers, aircraft hangars, anywhere that a stage could be erected, even on the back of a truck or a tank. Now, I want to point out a few of these things here. So you can see here a typical thing that might be on some airbase or something. See, a simple trestle stage, set up exactly like the ones you saw earlier on the beaches. The audience sitting in front, performing informal and easy relation to the audience, al fresco. Here we have the same thing in the desert, performing, you can see from the performance point of view, on a simple open air stage. They're not sitting on a beach in desert. Here, open stage, easy access to the audience, al fresco, on board ship, a large audience. Some of those early audiences of Pierrot, even on the beaches, were 2,000 or 3,000 a time. Here, even in Burma, that was a cross-dressed performer performing for the boys sat in front of them in an easy, informal relationship. That the BESA is the Bengal Entertainment Services Association. These shows represented a vision of home to those troops fighting overseas. The material and familiarity of the Pierrot concert party were accessible, life-affirming, and patriotic. They evoked a sense of national identity and pride. As Gracie Fields said, and you will forgive my attempts at a female Lancastrian accent, I hope. Gracie Fields. Most of the boys were like old friends when they heard my songs, which they may have heard in the halls or on the radios. And when they hear them again in France, they were back home again for a little while. The concert party and Pierrot troupe format wasn't the sole preserve of ENSA by any means. And many battalions formed their own concert parties just as they had in the 1418 conflict. But as the war progressed, the Army Welfare Office felt they could draw directly upon armed servicemen to provide the entertainment in fighting zones or the prohibited areas, where civilians, those that were in the ENSA troops, they simply weren't allowed there. Such service personnel could return to their military duties at a moment's notice, and these were known as the Central Pool of Artists, but they were more familiarly known as Stars in Battle Dress, SIB. And these were all male units, certainly at the start, and were recruited from serving soldiers who had already got some stage experience or a natural gift for performance. And within just a year or two, most divisions in the army offered divisional concert troupe and battalion canteen shows. Now, the roll call of those who began their stellar careers in SIB, Stars in Battle Dress, it's a treasure trove of the late 20th century light entertainment. See how many of these you can recognize. John Le Mesurier, Terry Thomas, Arthur Haynes, Charlie Chester, Frankie Howard, Tommy Cooper, Spike Milligan, Harry Seacombe, Jimmy Perry, Rex Jameson, Bill Pertley, Nat Canella, and many, many, many others. All of them undertook SIB tours. In addition to SIB, the RAF developed their famous gang shows under the leadership of Somerset-born Ralph Reeder. And these toured RAF stations and in the process discovered some towering talents. Now I wonder, anyone know who that chap is? Correct. Peter Sellers started the RAF gang shows. Now, do you know why the RAF were asked to do gang shows? I'm sure you know, Scout movement had been really successful before the war, creating gang shows. Where I started my career. What happened was that the RAF, the war office, approached us and said, "You've been so successful with this bringing on. Now, would you work with our RAF on the base, on the air?" Yes, but when you're there, we would like you to report back to the war on the morale and the state of play and the effective of each air base that you go to. Ralph Reeder said yes. So Ralph Reeder's first contract with the RAF gang shows wasn't as a showman, it was actually in escort. Excuse me. Other examples of people who made their name in the gang shows were people like Dick Emery, Max Wall, Tony Hancock, and Eric Sykes. This wide variety of different wartime concert parties drew their form and content directly from the seaside troupes that had been so integral to the perception of home, nationhood, and fun in the pre-war years. These versatile companies also had to be flexible enough to perform on many scales. One night, just a platoon of soldiers in a naffy. The following night, an aircraft hangar or a factory audience with thousands in front of them. Whatever the size of the audience, the basic staging, facilities, and alfresco nature of these wartime concert parties directly drew parallels with the rough and ready fit-up stages of the Edwardian seasides. Performances took place in convalescent hospitals, where the accessibility of the Pierrot and concert party image and format meant that troops were formed to help with the casualties' rehabilitation processes. That had also been done in the First World War. Troops were even formed by British prisoners in Nazi and Burmese prisoner of war camps to try and maintain a sense of perspective and good humor in places of utter degradation and humiliation. Now, just to show you a few things. So this is in a prisoner of war camp. These guys have managed to make themselves matching Pierrot costumes. Look at you. And rough. And look at them. They're all sitting in an informal semicircle. Can you see? We have some pretty Pierrots. Cross-dressed. Here, because of course they would have to be. They're playing banjos. Possibly that's a skill at the back, I'm not sure. But even here, they have managed to recreate, because of what it represents. It represents a sense of home, a sense of place, a sense of identity, a sense of themselves in a place where all those things have been attempted to be withdrawn. Now I'm going to hit you with some statistics here about ENSA. In just 7 years, between 1939 and 1946, there were over 2.5 million performances and film presentations by ENSA. This one organisation produced 500 shows a week. It employed 80% of the professional performers working in the industry at the time. It is the largest entertainment organisation up to that point ever to have existed in the world. So the Seaside Pierrot and concert party format had truly become, by this point, a mass medium. However, the greatest impact of the Pierrot concert party form wasn't in the contemporary live entertainments at all. It was in the broadcast media. During the Second World War, as I'm sure you know, the wireless connected significantly more millions of civilians and service personnel throughout the globe than had ever been achieved before. The Music While You Work series, first transmitted by the BBC in 1940, brought live broadcasts of shows of ENSA troupes, variety acts, and swing acts. And a year earlier, this ITMAR had been broadcast. You know what ITMAR stands for? It's that man again, that acronym that played with all the acronyms of the Second World War. As a boy, the show's star, Tommy Handley, had been inspired by watching Adler and Sutton's Pierrots on the Isle of Man during the summer holidays. And he began his performing career, as you can see here, in 1918 with the Royal Navy Air Service Concert Party, the RNAS, at Roehampton. And one of the other performers in that troupe was a certain G.H. Eliot, a blackface performer from the halls. Handley brought all this experience of Pierrots and concert party to his presenter's role in the new show. ITMAR was an innovative sketch-based comedy featuring characters and catchphrases which owed much to the ensemble playing of the concert party format. ITMAR was in the vanguard of a new brand of comedy that was being forged, this time on the airwaves. It fused concert party material with a fresh, irreverent spirit of nonsense. The inoffensive, gentle jibing of authority and bureaucracy inherent in the absurd situations and character exaggerations, these were an echo of the familiarity and accessibility of those seaside troupes. And ITMAR blazed a quixotic trail of comedy that was followed by others, like Much Binding in the Marsh, Kenneth Horne, or Bandwagon, with Arthur Askey. He'd made his name with Fred Wilden's Margate concert party before the war. But there was another revolutionary comedy on the airwaves about to appear. Guess what it was? The Goons, of course. This was first transmitted in 1951 and became an instant success. You'll know who they all are, so I won't humiliate you by asking. At the core of their success was this trio of creative artists, but these had all learned their trade in concert parties whilst serving in the armed forces. Spike Milligan was a former signaller with the Royal Artillery who performed comedy and music for his battalion concert parties. And Harry Seacombe had formed a concert party whilst in the Royal Artillery, and Peter Sellers had performed in both ENSA and the RAF gang shows. The creativity and sheer exuberance of this new team resulted in a satirical surrealism that was at once both subversive and very, very British. It was as if the old sketch format of Pierrots and concert parties had evolved into something totally modern and technically advanced. It was ITMAR and the Goons, with their roots firmly embedded in a combination of concert party performance and the armed forces, that laid the foundations for more recent comedy sketch-based shows like Monty Python's Flying Circus, The Fast Show, even things like Little Britain. After the Second World War, there were a combination of factors that led to the decline and eventual demise of the alfresco seaside concert parties. The emergence of summer camps, epitomized, of course, by Billy Butlin's model, providing accommodation, catering, and entertainment all under one roof. This was a modern alternative to the vagaries of seaside guest houses associated with a faded pre-war era. Motoring holidays, caravans, and hiking, they promised a freedom and a healthy outdoor substitute for fish and chips and sedentary deck chair sunbathing with a windbreak next to you and a thermos flask. The 1950s saw the advent of the package holiday in the sun. It was more affordable and easy to travel to those destinations like the Costa del Sol, which even in its very name suggested the kind of climate that Scarborough and Skegness could only ever hope for. But there's one thing, perhaps above all else, that significantly affected the pre-war, well, the post-war concert parties, Pierrot troupes, and in fact, all our lives ever since. And that was the advent of the teenager. I don't know about you, but my mum left school when she was 14. My gran left school when she was 11. They went to work. They had to earn a living from that point onwards. It was only in the post-war period that this idea of people who weren't from a particularly wealthy background could have any sense of independence. Young people had the freedom and intention to forge their own new styles of entertainment in music, dance, and comedy, as well as new forms of entertainment consumption, such as transistor radio, 12-inch LP vinyl records, not the shellac that broke on the floor every time you dropped them, and of course, television, once the coronation had gone. Such exciting new attractions and technologies resulted in the concert parties falling into a sharp decline. The last record that I can find of any seaside concert party regularly performing in the open air is the Ramblers on Clacton Pier in 1964. From this date, there are no professional Pierrot troupes or concert parties at the Seaside left in existence, merely a vernacular memory. You can also see a picture of Oh What a Lovely War. Famously, in 1963, Pierrots were used as a theatrical device by Joan Littlewood with her theatre workshop company at the Theatre Royal Stratford East to make a satirical attack upon the conduct of the Great War in this production. And the subsequent film version, directed by Richard Attenborough in '69, made the connection with their seaside entertainment past even stronger by setting it on Brighton's West Pier. It's worth saying that there's absolutely no etymological connection between the word Pierrot and the term a seaside pier. There is no connection. It is a happy coincidence, if you like. But piers and Pierrots, even though Pierrots performed on piers, that kind of makes a synchronicity that people enjoy, but there is no etymological reason why that should be the case. Excuse me. However, the legacy of the troupes can also be traced in the new musical genres, which began to emerge post-war. The Pierrots and concert parties had a profound impact upon the formation and presentation of skiffle music that proliferated in the 1950s. Originally, skiffle was a slang term coined in the 1920s by Black Americans for music and dance happenings. But in the 1930s, popular music was swamped by swing and dance bands. So the term skiffle itself fell into decline. However, after the Second World War, it was resurrected in Britain as a contemporary description for banjo and guitar-led music, which linked jazz with the sound of blues. This was a new and dynamic, specifically British musical popular movement, with the sound being created by everyday objects that could be found in the home. Washboards, tea chests with broom handles, just 3 chords, or in my case, 8, on a banjo or guitar. Most kids who took up the skiffle craze saw it as an escape from the drab post-war austerity. Nevertheless, a significant number of the skiffle pioneers had connections with pre-war and Enser-style concert parties and gang shows. And in the 1950s skiffle troupes, or bands of musicians, performing for an unstratified audience and playing accessible, popular music, laid the foundations for our contemporary pop industry. And it's acknowledged as having inspired a host of luminaries in the popular music world. People like Ringo Starr and John Lennon, Bill Wyman, David Bowie, Pete Townsend, Syd Barrett, Jimmy Page, Rod Stewart, Mark Bolan, Mott the Hoople, the Bee Gees, Joe Cocker, many, many, many more. Similarly, those comedy sketch formats, which had evolved through minstrelsy, Pierrots and concert parties, they re-emerged in radio and television, And it would be impossible to have contemporary television shows like Goodness Gracious Me or Horrible Histories without the previous alfresco popular comedy forms. But by the 1980s, the connection with the seaside past of such forms had been lost. And there's barely any record of their impact on generations of British working class audiences and 90 years of an indigenous British performance form. There's almost no film footage of any seaside troupes, hardly any, apart from this 90 seconds that I'm about to show you on Blackpool Central Pier, which is from the BBC Mitchell and Kenyon series. There isn't one sound recording of any of the vast number of troupes who for almost a century have plied their trade at the seaside. But now they're simply embedded as a sort of vestigial memory, what we academics call intangible cultural heritage. I'll show you this video and hope that the sound plays when I press this button. Yes. So this is from 1904, Flockton and Foster's, Blackpool, our program, Victorian Pier. There they are, don't they look fine in their concert party outfits, matching, naughty, very smart, very natty, watched in the open air, al fresco, by an audience, as usual, wearing hats as you would in the open air. But it's out as an unstratified audience. They didn't have to pay an entrance fee to be here. Look, they're doing a dance routine. Not terribly complex. They didn't need to go to dance school for that. There's someone playing a piano at the back, and can you see the bentwood chairs in a semicircle, an informal al fresco relationship to their audience. There they go, doing a natty little dance and a salute. The camera now start to move around the audience. Look, how many standing on this occasion. And in a moment, I want to keep your eye on this side, because over here, we're going to have a moment of characters. Can you see? What's he doing? With a Pierrot. There he is, collecting money, patting, bottling on the pier, collecting, busking for a living. That's virtually all that we have left as archive footage. I'm starting to try to collect more at the moment, and increasingly we're beginning to find it as home archives are being found. So we come more up to date now. In 1983, as you know, I was an undergraduate at Sussex University. I took that module on popular entertainment, and I read that book by Bill Pertwee. So I decided to perform with my own troupe, the Pierrotters, so named after Brighton's rotting West Pier, to explore the realities of performing as a Pierrot on the seafront. I sewed those costumes, I learned those chords, and busked on Brighton and Hove beaches with my troupe of 5. And from such humble beginnings, combined with a spirit of curiosity, youthful chutzpah, a lack of musical ability, inspired by punk, I began my embodied quest to research the story of Pierrots in Britain. But I had no intention of creating a museum piece, rather to reflect the spirit of the times which we inhabited. Street theatre and punk were my touchstones. The historical connection with the previous Pierrot troupes gave us a shared, if not consciously understood, connection with our audience. The costumes and material that we wore evoked a timeless seaside past. I remember really well, it was in our second season in 1984. We were on Brighton Palace Pier, and we'd been performing a song, and I think I was bottling. And there was a little old lady there, and she said to me, "Oh, it's nice to see you boys again." I said, "Thanks very much. Did you see us last year?" She said, "No." I said, "Oh, when did you last see us then?" She said, "1925. We were the current incumbents of a form, rather like the characters of Punch and Judy or the Dane in pantomime. We were the timeless epitome of location and occasion, more seaside spirits than a mere busking band. And it was this sense of timelessness which over our 27 seasons enabled us to play in such a wide range of circumstances. from tiny festivals and individual songs and routines for a granny and her grandchild on a bench. This is us in 1987 on the Isle of Wight on an old Pierrot pitch, to grand public performances like those we did at the Festival Hall or on London's South Bank, or at the Globe with Mark Rylance for Shakespeare's birthday, opening in the National Theatre of Variety at Blackpool Grand, and even being presented to Her Royal Highness the late Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace on behalf of Seaside entertainers. There you can see my invitation addressed to Uncle Tacko, which is how I was introduced. And I did give her a postcard and ask her if she had any gigs for us, but she said no at the time, unfortunately. And one of my Pierrots from the Pierrotters is here today at the back. There's Shabby at the back there, shameless Shabacco, who's joined me here today to help carry my bag. So thank you for that. Whilst the Pierrotters had enabled me to enjoy the practice of performance, in more recent years, I've been able to consider the cultural significance and impact of the form in a more structured way by teaching and refashioning the Pierrot form with new generations of performers for a variety of contexts. The Pier Echoes, excuse me, the Pier Echoes project created a new Pierrot troupe of 4 emerging artists who came from a range of young performers from contemporary street arts, circus, and folk arts. I taught them a set of songs, routines, and sketches. In particular, I was interested to see if the costume and flexibility of the act was still accessible for a contemporary audience, and if some of the old routines and material from former troupes could be presented on an equal footing alongside new material which they wrote themselves, which might have a very different sort of sensibility. And despite none of the audience having direct previous experience of a Pierrot troupe or concert party, all those audiences found their material accessible, showing how it could provide more than just an act of heritage recreation. The next project was Chin Up. And it was the potential for the Pierrot concert party format to occupy a porous relationship between past and present that I next explored with this 2-year project in Torbay called Chin Up. And it was funded by the Armed Forces Community Covenant. We aim to re-examine the role of entertainments during wartime. In this project, I worked with a small group of self-selected young people aged 13 to 23 to devise an outdoor Pierrot show for the Armed Forces Day in Babbacombe and the Air Show in Paynton. I was keen to discover if it was possible to use the flexibility of the form to produce something that could challenge the more conventional styles of entertainment that were on offer at such events by using parody and satire in much the same way as had been achieved in Oh, What a Lovely War. And the Chin Uppers performance was warmly received, despite, or perhaps I would argue because of, its gently subversive material. I've also used the Pierrot formula to work with people of different abilities, particularly groups of people with learning difficulties. The uniform simplicity of the costume, combined with the accessibility of the material, makes it an ideal way with which to develop integrated projects that celebrates people with a variety of backgrounds and abilities. And this aspect directly reflects some of the ways in which those Pierrot concert parties were used in rehabilitation programs in the military convalescence hospitals of the First and Second World Wars. And here you can see 2 performers. There was actually a whole row of them similarly performed. Some of them had learning difficulties, some of them didn't have learning difficulties, some of them played a role with the jig doll puppet, some played the patting of the boards, so the puppet work. But the audience couldn't tell which was which, and their performance ability on stage was the same. My aim had been to try to create something where all people could be embraced in the same thing at the same time, using the Pierrot format in the way that I thought that it had done historically, and I believe that it did. In 2018, I completed a joint project with Venue Cymru at Llandudno in North Wales about Will Catlin's troupe and a large number of touring concert parties and Pierrots who regularly performed along the North Welsh coast. As part of this, I worked with Bangor University local museums and history groups, as well as teaching a new youth group called the Jollies. The Jollies and the Follies was fun. And we created a new professional troupe, the Follies, the new Follies. I also mounted the country's largest ever exhibition about the history of Pierrots, and there is a permanent website now dedicated to it all. If you type in seasidefollies.co.uk, you'll get that. And it's got loads of material on there. In 2017, I was awarded a PhD at the University of Exeter for my thesis, which was inspired by my experiences as an itinerant Pierrot performer. Recently, I've started to teach at universities and other groups the roots of our performing heritage. This has led to various BBC television and radio appearances to provide history and detail of the form. Over the last 40 years, I've amassed the world's largest archive of material related to the Pierrot industry, which I hope will eventually provide the basis of a national archive, publicly hosted, about the enormous contribution they have made. And this year, Routledge have published my monograph, Don't Forget the Pierrots, the first book to have been published about the form since that one by Bill Pertwee so long ago. It's available from all good bookshops, but it's also available from me today if you would like it signed as well. And I've got the dosh. This is the first full history and analysis of a mass vernacular popular entertainment form, forged from a multi-ethnic mix of European, African, and American cultures. It's been all but ignored for a century, yet it has had such a profound impact upon the past, the present, and the future of British popular culture. They were and are truly Pierrot heroes. Now you don't escape that easily. You've got one last chance to join in before you get your mince pies. Are you ready? I'm happy to take any questions as well, and at home as well. I'm sorry you couldn't see half of me half the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lidington. We have some questions coming up on the Q&A panel with our little Zoom creature. So let's see if we can actually get those questions up.
Sorry?
Okay.
I've got all the dosh you need. I've got some postcards as well. All bargains available.
Okay. Right. Probably they don't want to see me. Okay, this is a question for you. Is it possible to see and hear the speaker? It's inaudible when he moves away, and I can't make sense of what is going on. Yes, hello, listener, if you're still there. We've also recorded this as a video, so hopefully the sound quality might be better. Oh dear. Could we persuade the speaker to face the camera?
No, I'm talking to you.
Right, I'm really sorry. He is facing the camera for the video. I can see 4 portraits, but not you. And also someone has said thank you. Okay, I think, well, thank you very much, listeners. I'm sorry this has been a bit difficult in terms of the vision here. We will try to rectify that in future. I think I'm going to take some questions now from our audience here at the Art Workers Guild. Yeah, I think, well, no, because they want to see you. So why don't you come back? Why don't you come back where I am? Let's see if we can get you. Can you look into the, maybe, is that better? Hey, okay. Is that working for you? Can we prop you up maybe on some books?
That's what they're for.
No, they're not. Come on. I'm actually going to buy one, so don't say that.
I should actually say that the Society for Theatre Research has been really supportive of my work over the years. When I first started looking in Yorkshire about 20 years ago, I was given a small grant towards some of the research, and more recently I was given some as well towards some of the pictures that are in the book. So my grateful thanks for that. It's been very much appreciated.
I'm sorry, we haven't thought about using your book as a way of making you visible. Anyway, we've got a few questions coming from the floor. And please speak up so that we can get this recorded. Thank you. I think we've got a place here for a long time ago now, and there's inherent their acts from other players in past or their family.
Yes, it did. I mean, interestingly, when I was showing you the Follies and the Jollies, one of the Jollies was my son, who started to learn the trade, if you like. But yes, they did. And they also kept things within families. So the Catlin family had quite a few. But it was one of those professions, you know, people would be working pantomime at Christmas, summer season, and then you would do the halls or whatever you could get, wherever you could get a gig, you would do it. But you would hope to get a season of work. You would hope to get panto season. So as obviously things were handed down, but it wasn't like circus families where there were particular skills that had to be learned. But if you were born into a family where you were part of an itinerant family's profession, you kind of knew where you were going, I guess, with it. But I think a lot of people who would have been in the profession would have encouraged their children not to. Not only don't put your daughter, for women particularly so, in the open air performing, there are very few female performers even now on the streets. And for women at the times that we're talking about, kind of the 19th and early 20th century, it was not thought to be a safe or appropriate place, let alone on a stage. Outdoors was worse. But for men too, get yourself a proper job. I mean, I lost count of the number of times I was told that. I mean, all the time that I was performing and busking, I was always being told, what do you do for a living? And I go, well, this. I mean, years ago, I used to run an opera house up in Wakefield for a while. And I used to go to the Arts Council meetings with my banjo in a case on the way to Eastbourne or Worthing, or wherever it was we were going that weekend, and I'd get the train down, go for the meeting. And then all the other managers of those theatres would laugh at me. Oh, you're off to do your little Seaside thing again, are you? And I said, yes, I am. I said, how many people you got in your theatre this weekend? Knowing that I would probably have the same as them, which is, 100, 150 would see the Friday and the Saturday night. I said, right, well, I'll be playing to at least 5,000 tomorrow, and I'll play to 5,000 the next day. And if it's a sunny day, it'll be double that. And I just said to them, what is it? If it's bums on seats that you matter about, well, I'm winning hands down. But I'm not charging them for it. I'm having to work to persuade people to give me their money. And that's a different relationship. And so I've always maintained that it's a very hard way to earn a living, but it's a very honest way to earn a living.
Any other questions? Other questions on the floor? Yes.
No, it's people playing. It's people playing, literally playing with the idea. The very first troupe, the Clifford Essex's troupe, it is white, but they have white ruffs, and the black ruff just simply sets off around the white face and the black face. But you then see coloured ones. You see lots of kind of piping around them. You see checkered ones. It's a bit like Punch and Judy booths. There is an assumption with Punch and Judy booths they're always red and white, but actually when you look at the pictures, they're blue and white check. They're harlequin. All sorts of different fabric is used, and certainly in the wartime they'd have used whatever they could find. A bright fabric, contrasting. Those are the more elements. So there is nothing signified by those particular colours. There's one over there.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's actually been, by the way, I just want to thank you for your mention of my book of my blog this year. I wonder, can you say what were the earliest recordings in your knowledge of any of this material? Like, sound I wonder, is it the lack of recording and the lack of film footage that in a way contributes to the forgottenness of the whole thing? Because you think now in the YouTube era, you go on YouTube, there's nothing of this year in that era, and I think that's what a lot of young people will relate to. And if you can't find it, you can find early silence after people. But this is so much disappeared from the record, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting question is, why wasn't it filmed?
Yeah.
So there is an assumption within the filmmaker. It was clearly something people wanted to have memories of. They clearly wanted all these thousands of postcards. They clearly wanted the song sheets. And Pellissier did do recordings, but then he was in the West End and he had a relationship with music that was more formal, if you like, than almost all the other performers, apart maybe from Clifford Essex in those very early years. But none of those seaside troupes were covered, and I think it's to do with the way that history is told. And so only now, the last 6 months or so, I've started to find, you know how people are starting to digitize local history archives in a more meaningful way than it ever used to be. And in some of those, they're starting to pop up. I was sent one the other day from Scotland, from a troupe performing it. It's from about 1925, 1930, so it's quite late. But that early stuff, we do have a lot of books and a lot of information, a lot of excitement about those musical stars between 1860 and 1905 or 10, until we get the footage. I have found some footage. So L'Enfant Prodigue, this is where you get, well, I get anarchy about it, but L'Enfant Prodigue, which was that French production that came over, that Clifford Essex saw, that meant he created his first troupe. That production was restaged and filmed. And it is a film of the original staging. And it is the first European full-length film that was made. And it's the first film of a stage production ever made anywhere. Yet there is no digital copy of that film available anywhere. I went to Belgium. No, I contacted Belgium, and they said they would charge me £1,200 if I wanted to have such a copy. And I said, sorry, I can't. I haven't got the money to do that. But there is a pathé, and you can get it online, of little sections of versions of L'Enfant Prodigue. And I managed to find a recording of the Wurmser music, and I can sort of put the two together, and I've got the original score with the movements marked in it, and I've got some of the original drawings from it, and I've got the original program from it in 1891. I can start to piece those things together. And there was, in Birmingham at the Flatpack Festival, a wonderful event where they digitized that film, that Pathé film. They digitized the music, they blended them together and augmented it with live musical performance and performed it live. It was a wonderful mixture of technology. But right now we have the opportunity for technology to give us access to some of this stuff for the first time. And so your book, which kind of pulls that stuff together, and you've got a kind of a whole record of the records that were done, the recordings that were done, and the performances that were done about one troupe. That hasn't been done before. The local historians have done little things about Waterloo Pierrots, or the Gold's Pierrots in bygone Kent, or whatever it is that I've got some copy of somewhere. But an analysis of what it was, when it was, and the thing I'm fascinated by, why it was, and the doing of it. Sorry at home, but I don't like Zoom. I don't like performing here, because that's what performing is. The haptic experience of live engagement with real people in real time. I do hybrid performances because I want to reach people at home, and I enjoy television, I enjoy radio, but the real experience is doing it. So the Pellissier stuff, I want to see the dog routine. I've got it as a note in my head to do it with my students. I want to try. It's this thing where he did he wrote a song. He wrote a song, did a song, And then there's a chorus each time where the barking gets louder by the people on stage. But the end bit, it's classic. The end bit is the audience do all the barking. So the whole place is a cacophony of madness. It presages the crazy gang. That's what it does. Or the play What Went Wrong. It's that. And we're still doing it, but we just don't know. We don't know why these things, and yet there's a history of it working. And what we need to do is unpick how it worked and treasure that. That's what I can't bear, is not treasuring the fact that minstrelsy is responsible for comedy and music that is happening now. It wasn't just a racist stereotype.
One last question. Yes. Yes.
I've got a friend who sang in the days of the Black Mountains. That is the sort of child of the whole of your subject as well.
But you are, what you're describing is a. Oh, sorry.
Pass on gags and don't necessarily know where they start from.
No,
They
my
are inherent jokes and so to speak,
my friend who was a dame used to do the line, used to throw the sweets out, and then he would say, have you all got a sweetie? Because it's northern, you all got a sweetie? And they'd say, no. I would say, oh, never mind. If you have got a sweetie, give it a lick and pass it on. But that's kind of what we do in performance. It's what we do in life. We give it a lick. We have a go. And then we pass it on. I have given it a go. I want to pass it on. But we need to know what we're dealing with, that the blackface minstrelsy is a hot and difficult topic. Gender fluidity is a hot and difficult topic. However, in my opinion, understanding forms, whether it's pantomime, whether it's Pierrot troupes, concert parties, popular entertainment, because it's to the ordinary people in an unstratified public open space, not mediated, has the capacity to explore those things, has the capacity to help us understand who we were, but most importantly, who we are and who we want to be. That's the bit that I'm passionate about. Who do we want to be? And at a time when British identity is in collapse because we're trying to redefine it after 2.5 centuries, 3 centuries or whatever of imperialism, and we're coming out the other side and starting to decide who we are again, I think using things like this is a way of understanding it and connecting again. And I hope that I can do that with young people as well as with older people.
Tony, thank you very, very much for this. I will just, thanks so much.
That's all right.
No, you don't have to run out. No. We'll just switch positions just for a minute, and someone will get this man a glass of wine. Right. Hi there. Yeah. So you're probably aware that a high number of people in the creative professions are neurodiverse. And that's where we'll be heading on January 25th, talking about how drama training and how actors address this question of neurodiversity. We will have a panel with us to address that. And also in February, we will be having a talk about, is it a one-hit wonder or is it a mega flop? The history of musical flops. So have a lovely holiday season and safe travels through this horrible weather. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Those of you who are at home, I hope you get a nice drink and some mince pies, because that's what we're going to do here. We're going to get a nice drink and some mince pies. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tony.
Merry Christmas. Come and buy my